So I'm joined here today. We're very lucky to have him, Gleb Lukicov. He is co-host of the ML Ops community in London. He is a founding ML Ops engineer at Electric Twin. And Electric Twin bring together data and people and technology in a way you might not have come across before. They create synthetic populations, so they're used by governments and enterprises to predict what people will do and hopefully solve some of those people-shaped problems that we have in the world, make people's lives better. So very interesting stuff. Now, you're hosting a panel at MCP, which is an event in 2 short weeks. I wanted to get your insight into the hands of the leaders who are in organizations who are potentially looking at MCP. What I wanted to get into is where MCP fits into the organization's plans and help the leaders understand where they should invest in MCP, what that solves, and why it might help their engineers in that process. So for me, coming into this, Gleb, I was thinking that the internet is built for humans. We've seen things like Project Mariner from Google, go about and click things on the internet. That seems like a very slow way of doing it. If you were watching it yourself, you would decide, well, get out of the way, I'll just do it myself. Is the challenge that MCP approaches to solve, is it to make that piece go away? Is it to build interfaces so that large language models can go off and solve some of these challenges?
Yeah, and you touched on the kind of right note here. So MCP is really a protocol that is AI first, right? So we had before LLMs and various other ML models interacting with the tools out there in the world and in the agentic realm. But what MCP really brings to the table is the standardization. Wherever you are a LLM model developer, a consumer, a tool developer, or somewhere in between, you now have a standard that you can follow upon. If you want to connect a single tool to a large language model, there is now only a single connection you need to make. And once it's solved, it can then be reused across different projects. So that is really the value that it's bringing. Analogy of what MCP is similar to is like containers for code. So we're of course familiar for Docker containers and the large benefit they bring in deploying and standardizing our applications. So MCP does quite similar, but for AI.
Okay, so we've got containers there. I think everyone in my group would understand that. Is this also a bit like microservice architecture, which is often in containers as well, whereby you start to have agreements as to what that service is? You could put them in service catalogs and that sort of thing to enable systems to be more extensible. Is that the same sort of model here?
That's right. So one of the core pillars of MCP essentially is analogous to service discovery, but this time is for large language models. So if you are building an MCP server and you have various tools, the way you will advertise them to an LLM, you have a description alongside and examples on how to utilize that tool, such that when a user comes along and asks a question, various MCP servers exposes those available tools quite readily for that workflow. And that's the value here. So you still, as before MCP, you still have the large language models. That's where the intelligent part comes in. You still have the servers with the tools and the data. And then what MCP does is just streamlines of how they essentially talk and interact with each other.
Right. So we're taking because a lot of people are trying to interact with chatbots, use semantics to instruct something to do something, take an intent and carry out an action. But so often with LLMs, we get stuck on an opinion. It has an opinion, but where does it go to do those things? And MCP enables that semantic, that intent to go off and use a service catalog and then carry out those activities. So that sounds very interesting for the business area as a whole. Probably earlier in this stage where we're somewhat overseeing what's happening anyway, it sounds like a first use case might be some internal tooling where you can be maybe less certain, but more exploratory. Is that where you're seeing these early stages come in?
Absolutely. So it's very much early stages. And the MCP tooling and MCP servers that are currently available are all built mostly by developers for developers to solve those development workflow type of problems. So where would you consume MCP tools? Usually through your IDE, so your development environment, through Cloud Desktop. So most end users are developers themselves, but there is so much more potential for MCP to be used for productivity. So we're quite in the early days, and I'm quite excited of where, as a community, we'll bring the MCP protocol, kind of the new iterations, new features how it's going to be shaped.
Yeah. So I can see, if we look at something like business intelligence, this dream of having a computer listening to what you're saying, I want to see a projection on this assumption going off into the next 6 months. What might that look like? What should I be looking at? And what data we do have on those pieces now? And we're looking down a path where a system would go off, take that intent, look at the systems it has access to, establish which data it has access to and could be valid in that scenario, and start to bring those things back without anyone touching a keyboard. So a real democratization of that technology based on intents, rather than as before, you had to know how to program it, you had to get the time in. So a really fast forward. And the safeguards, I think, are built into some of this as well, right? So MCP isn't just about accessing the protocols and things. Access control is built in, monitoring is built in as well. So it's a fully formed standard. Is that right?
That is true. And in many ways, it's also kind of backfills on the promise of AI and large language models, from being an exciting chatbot to an actual agent, right? So we have been already living for a year plus in the sort of like agentic realm, but have we really been utilizing all this capability that we have, right? Have our models been connecting to our Slack, to our databases? So far, what we're seeing with MCP is we're finally in those stages. It is now becoming much easier to do. I have personally a bit of a kind of click, sort of like a light bulb moment, just trying out the 11 AI voice assistant. Right there at the center is the plus button. So I was like thinking, what is it used for? And of course, this plus button is inviting you to connect an MCP server that is useful for you. Because of course, a personal assistant without being able to act upon your commands is not very useful. It might tell you about the weather. It might advise you on something in its own knowledge base, but it only becomes a true and useful assistant when it can actually act upon your commands, can connect to your calendar, can tell you about the upcoming emails and so on. And so that's where MCP comes in. You have the intelligence and capability on the model on one side, and existing tools that we already interact with on the other. And MCP is that easy bridge that connects the two.
Fantastic. And those attending the event can start to see some of the examples of things people have been building out, and they can start to see the road ahead, what's being planned, so that you're getting on at this early stage of an already established protocol, so that you can start to build with those building blocks. It feels a lot like when we're at the early stages of public cloud, where all these pieces were popping up, and if you knew how to speak cloud, you could start to employ them. And that's where we saw a lot of businesses really take off.
Absolutely. Yeah, the speed at which people are building things with MCP are just staggering. I'm glad you haven't asked me about my predictions for the next 6 months, because I can't even tell you what's going to be like in 2 weeks when they actually have the conference. But luckily, we're joined by experts from Google, Moonpig, and DevOps Domains. So it's going to be an exciting panel where we can explore and kind of summarize all the learnings from the day and ask our expert speakers about sort of their opinions and their predictions for the near future.
Fantastic. Well, I can't wait to be there. Can't wait to see the panel that you bring together and the awkward questions that you ask them in the name of progress and entertainment. So thanks for joining us today, Gleb. I look forward to the event, and do get in touch, anyone, if you'd like to know more about the event too. Take care.
Thanks, Anthony. See you in 2 weeks.